one where they exchange hostages who are women, children, sick or elderly men for those are Israeli hostages in Gaza for Palestinian prisoners. They're having a hang up on that because the Hamas is not sure that Israel will go to the next step, which is a broader exchange and a cessation of hostilities. Because of that, they're hung up. Israel going in and striking, they've been striking where Hamas is at, which unfortunately is often hospitals, mosques, schools. Hamas fights from within the population, and that causes Israel to strike them, which has very deleterious and unfortunate effects, like the results of the strike we saw in the hospital.
At the top, you mentioned Hamas not being able to potentially even locate all of these hostages. What do you think Israel could do or should do in response if more admissions take place in the coming days and weeks?
Well, I do hope we get to this first stage, right? Exchange, maybe 30 or 40 or however many hostages are considered women, children, and elderly men. There's a dispute there between how to treat some of the middle-aged and younger men who are not soldiers for Palestinian prisoners. I hope we can get to that because that will allow an increase in aid. And at least get that first step done. The aid's doubled over the last 3 months, the amount of trucks per day getting in, but they could use another doubling at this point as we, due to conditions in Gaza. Hamas is going to have trouble with some of the other terrorist organizations like PIJ that may hold hostages. That's for Hamas to settle and get resolved before the final cessation of hostilities.
Well, look, a major sticking point has been that Israel's insistence on IDF forces remaining there in Gaza following a ceasefire. Earlier today, NewsNation asked the Consul General of Israel in New York about that. Take a listen.
We declared in the beginning of the war that we will not build new settlements in Gaza. The Prime Minister said it, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense. Actually, this is the policy of our government. But we need the presence of the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli forces, to prevent, from the Hamas to fire missiles on our people.
So what do you think about his response there?
First, I appreciate the fact that they're not going to build settlements there. That's appropriate. But I also understand why they're going to keep forces there. I think it would be negligent for Israel to just leave Gaza at this point after having had the events of last October 7th. I think their domestic population would consider it negligent to just walk away until you understand how Gaza is going to be domestically governed during the reconstruction phase, because that's the final step. When they do the final exchange of prisoners and the cessation of hostilities, there will be a reconstruction phase. At that point, they'll need a governance system. If it's just going to be Hamas or Hamas lookalikes, Israel needs to be present. And, I think they have a plan for how they would be present with the least visible impact. And certainly there's no intention of creating settlements in Gaza. I don't know who would want to live there. And I suspect they have no intention of doing that.
And I think skeptics would even say it's too early to even talk about reconstruction. But what would that look like?
Expensive. I think it would be expensive. I think it's going to look like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, other Arab countries that have come to, that have basically joined the Arab Accord, the Abraham Accords, or in a close relationship with Israel, could provide that money. I'd say Egypt, but Egypt's been very unreliable in this. But those other countries can certainly provide the financing to get reconstruction started. But we're talking about numbers that are in the hundreds of, in my mind, Ukraine-like in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, not to mention what this is like from a human standpoint and changing the lives drastically of a whole generation of people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has complained about Hamas's fractured leadership, saying he doesn't know who Israel is really even negotiating with. Could this be slowing the ceasefire talks? What can be done to solve that problem?
But certainly, I think two things are slowing. One, the one we mentioned earlier, where Hamas's ability to force the hand of other terrorist groups inside Gaza is probably weakened by Israelis' combat actions over the last 15 months. But secondarily, the Israeli efforts to kill Hamas's senior leadership have been successful. And as a result, it's very hard to pin down who can make the final decisions. Now, look, if the first phase goes well, where they're exchanging these hostages at the right times, at the right places, then he'll know he's in a position for the second phase. If it doesn't go well, that's an indication, should be an indication to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team that possibly Hamas is not in strong enough a position.
It's such a dire situation. I mean, 15 months. It's hard to imagine what the status would be of these hostages if they are still alive. Senior Director at the Foundation for Defense and Democracies and retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your service.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.